We'll start with a little meditation to generate positive motivation. So first, direct one's mind inward to check one's own state of mind, and then focus on your breath or the nature of your mind or another object of placement meditation, and do some placement meditation for a couple minutes to settle your mind down and generate some mental focus and clarity. And then recognize. So the next step is to sort of generating a sense of being interconnected with other sentient beings. And then, so including them in our motivation for doing this session. Um, but begin by just observing how, as a sentient being, as a person, you have a mind. And then by virtue of having a mind, then we naturally wish to have well-being and happiness or flourishing. And we wish to be free from harm and pain and suffering. So, yeah, come into touch with that sort of sense for yourself, your own wish for happiness, wish to be free from suffering. And then generate a sense of all the other sentient beings in the world and other living beings all around you. So usually typically we visualize with our mother and family and friends to our left, and then our father of this life at our immediate right, and all our male family and friends there. And then those sort of enemies or antagonists directly in front, facing towards, and then all the other sentient beings of the six realms in human form all around us. But you can also be creative and visualize, any other way you like. But the main point is to just, in some organized way, have a sense of all other sentient beings being around us, or being together with all of them, being interconnected with all of them, recognizing our interdependence, how our existence depends upon them, and how the way we exist also affects all of them. And then recognizing how we and all other sentient beings are the same in having this fundamental wish for well-being and happiness, and wanting to be free from pain and harm, suffering. And then ultimately including all of them in our motivation for this session. So essentially we're working towards, thinking that whatever I do in this session may be beneficial not only to myself, but also to countless other sentient beings. And ultimately, in order for me to be of the greatest possible benefit to all these kind mother sentient beings, may I quickly become fully enlightened. And so may this, for that purpose, then I engage in this session. So take a couple minutes to generate that motivation, or whatever motivation is most authentic for you, most powerful for yourself. And then if you like, you can visualize Shakyamuni Buddha or another object of refuge in the space in front of you. And then with a wish to free oneself and others from suffering, and recognizing the ability of the Buddha Dharma Sangha to protect oneself and others from suffering. And we can recite this prayer, the four immeasurable thoughts, and then the refuge bodhicitta prayer. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to abide in equanimity, free from attachment to friends and anger towards enemies. May they abide in equanimity. I myself will cause them to abide in equanimity. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they have happiness and its causes. I myself will cause them to have these. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they be free from suffering and its causes. I myself will cause them to be free from these. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. How wonderful it would be for all sentient beings to be never separated from the happiness which is totally beyond suffering. May they never be separated from this. I myself will cause them to be never separated from the happiness which is totally beyond suffering. Please grant me blessings to be able to do this. So make a request from your heart to generate immeasurable equanimity immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy. And then we can recite, if you like, you can join reciting this refuge and bodhicitta prayer. Maybe once in Tibetan and then twice in English. Sangye chodon sogi chodon ma janjo badu dani kyabzu chi dagi chene gibe sonam ki rola penche sangye rupa sho. I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections of listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my two collections from listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha to benefit transmigratory beings. Okay, so that's it for the preliminary prayers. So do you remember what we talked about last week? What did we talk about last week? Let's hear what you remember. You can unmute yourself. Koda, are you trying? Unmute yourself and
I missed
at least say
last
one
week,
thing.
but
you did?
I missed last. I missed last week, but I watched the YouTube and I read the Liberation in the Palm of the Hands. It was beautiful.
Okay.
What I got in my notes were the various troubles that we have to work on to overcome. And then I got up to how karma starts to create our futureness. But I got very into the extreme views, the wrong views, doubts, ignorance, pride, etc., and the antidotes.
Right.
It was really beautiful. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So there was a whole list of the different afflictive emotions. There's the six root, well, also called delusions. I think in Pabonka, the translation in Pabonka is liberation in the palm of your hand that uses the term delusions. But yeah, there's the six root delusions, which are ignorance, attachment, anger, are the three root delusions. And then in addition, pride, doubt, and wrong views. And then wrong views, there's a list of 5. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the main thing we spoke about last week, but also a little bit, yeah, more about those. Kathleen, can you remember something? What else we spoke about? Since you're the brave one with your video on.
I think we spoke about how the delusions exaggerate the sense of self.
Yes. Yeah, that always is there because they all arise from the sense of self, the ignorance, which is an exaggerated sense of self. And then when they arise, they make that stronger. So they do exaggerate.
And we talked about the types of sufferings, and particularly, I think, with regard to what Kathleen said, how that sense of self increases our sense of suffering.
Yes, the types of sufferings that we spoke more about in the session before that. When we spoke about the 8 sufferings, the 6 sufferings, the 3 sufferings, that was the session before. But it also came up last session. That's true. Yeah, and when we do have afflictive emotions in the mind, like for example, when we have anger in the mind can't be happy at that time. But attachment, when we have attachment in the mind, often we feel happy. Even there's a sense of like craving, wanting something more. There's a lack of contentment, which disturbs the mind, but it's a little subtle. Another thing we looked at last week was like the causes, the 6 common causes of the afflictive emotions. What else then? I'm not sure. I don't know. Myself, we started with reviewing with the outlines from Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. Oh, then we looked at the wheel of life and how the 3 root delusions are depicted in the center of that. Yeah, I'll just maybe flip through some of the slides from last week, so to help spark our memories. So we started off with reviewing from the 2 sessions before with these outlines from Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. So remember, well, the whole outlines for this whole module are, well, this is this first one, ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. It goes together with one other, I think, looking at the sufferings of samsara in general. Here, I'll just flip to it because it's so easy to do, I think. Oh no, that's before. Here. Yeah, developing thoughts yearning for liberation. So by seeing the faults of samsara, we develop thoughts yearning for liberation. And then the second heading, ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. So then in that second heading is what we're under last week and this week both here. So ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. And it has 2 headings. Thinking of the source of suffering, the entry to samsara. So that means, it's the second noble truth, the truth of the source of suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering, which means all the afflictive emotions and karma. They're all part of that cause of suffering. So where does suffering arise from? Afflictive emotions in our mind, and then karma that we've accumulated through the force of those afflictive emotions in the past. So karma, of course, means action. So it means actions of body, speech, and mind, motivated by a deluded, a delusion or afflictive emotion, motivated by a distorted state of mind. And then, so there's that, and then what's going to come, like from next week and the week after, actually ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. So how do we actually get free from all this whole process which creates karma? Get free from all this karma. Get free from this whole process which creates samsara, right? So how do we get free from the truth of suffering, all the suffering experiences, and then the causes of those, the afflictive emotions and karma? So that will come next week. Then in the first heading there, thinking about the source of suffering, the entry to samsara, then so we're looking at the causes of suffering. Then how delusions, so this in red here is the list of topics from the Discovering Buddhism like module description, just to show where all those topics fit in the outlines. And then, so within that then is how delusions are developed, which is what we're looking at last week and this week, and then how karma is accumulated through them. So if you remember, like from last week, we had this kind of in terms of how delusions are developed. This we discussed a bit. This how the sequential development. How there's this fundamental ignorance, grasping at an exaggerated sense of self, then that leads to this exaggerated sense of concern with ourself and lack of concern with others. I want to turn on my laser pen. Yeah. So this first ignorance is like 1, then 2, then leads to selfishness. Then this exaggerated sense of concern with ourselves leads to attachment to what we desire, what's attractive. And then when we don't, especially when we don't get what we desire, or we encounter things we don't want, we don't like, then we get angry. So there's that kind of progression. And then, so the afflictive emotions, the list, and then the stages of the development, then the causes of delusions. We looked at the 6 common causes last week, and then the drawbacks, some of the faults of the afflictive emotions, why we want to be free from the delusions, how they disturb our mind, and how they cause disturbance in our life, pain in life, and how they cause us to take rebirth, and how they keep us trapped. They keep us trapped in the cycle of taking rebirth and then experiencing sickness, old age, all different kinds of problems, then death, and then after death, then rebirth again, and then the whole thing again and again and again, right? So yeah, that's what we looked at last week. So then, yeah, just flip through. These are the slides from last week. Yeah, so remember from last week also, see here in the Wheel of Life, yeah, around the outside, there's 12 links of dependent arising, representations of those. And then around the second rim in, or second level in, is the 6 realms of existence. I'll describe more like next week or later. And then there's white and black karma here, means non-virtuous is represented as black, virtuous represented as white. And then, so non-virtuous karma leading to rebirth in the 3 lower realms as an animal, hungry ghost, and hell being. And then virtuous karma leading rebirth in the 3 upper realms as a human demigod or a god. And then those are both powered, all those karma, whether it's virtuous or non-virtuous, both are produced by or arise from through the force of the 3 root afflictive emotions: ignorance, depicted as a pig, and then from the mouth of the pig, or in the mouth of the pig, is the tail of the 2 others, representing the 2 others come from that. So the snake representing anger, the pigeon representing attachment. Okay, so then this week we want to look at more on attachment this week. So and anger both actually. So yeah, I meant to get on to or say more about attachment. To speak more about attachment last week, but we ran out of time. So it means, yeah, this week we'll spend half the session, the first half of the session, on looking at attachment, and then the second half of the session looking at anger. But already, I can see this week I've made way more outlines than we can go through in one session. So I'll in the break, I'll send out the outlines on a Word file. I'll post it in the chat. I sent for the outlines from last week, I sent to Venerable Dundrup, but I'm not sure it got posted on the website or not.
It wasn't posted on the website. I will follow up with them.
Okay, if you could check with them. Okay, so the reason I'm spending more time on the afflictive emotions in general and attachment and anger. So my plan is this week we'll look at attachment and anger in some detail, and then next week we'll look at karma briefly, and then the 12 links of dependent origination. But within the 12 links of dependent origination, the first on ignorance, the first link of ignorance is the most important. So we'll spend probably half the session looking at ignorance. This kind of fundamental ignorance, which is the root of samsara. So the reason I'm spending so much time on these 3 root afflictions is because they are what, in our experience, they're what is like the most important thing kind of to deal with and reduce. And it's so helpful. And that's where I think one big strength of Buddhism is it has such good ways of working with anger and reducing it, working with attachment and reducing it. And it so clearly describes and identifies and then has very clear reasonings to eliminate the ignorance. So I find for most of it, this is one of the most helpful things in all of Buddhist teachings is this descriptions of these 3 root afflictions and then different methods, antidotes to deal with them. So one, I just find it's something very helpful material. And then 2, it's because essentially, even though there's a lot of practices like to deal with karma, to purify, negative karma we've created in the past. There's other practices of lojong, like to practice, kind of perseverance and patience in the face of suffering. And then there's, of course, the recognition of the suffering of samsara helps generate, renunciation for samsara, and also helps generate compassion for others. When we think about our own suffering, and then we generate the wish to be free from it. When we think about the suffering of others, then we generate the compassion, wishing to free others from suffering. So of course that's very beneficial, but to actually, in the long term, to be able to reduce and eliminate our own suffering, we have to understand where it comes from. And where it comes from is these afflicted emotions or delusions in the mind. So in a way, it's a deeper, more meaningful and important kind of way to benefit ourselves and others, is to understand the afflictive emotions. So looking at attachment, we'll look at it under 5 headings. First is the definition, which we already went over last week, but we'll review. And then divisions, which is not so important, and then the different causes for why we give rise to attachment, then some of the faults, looking at some of the faults of it, and then antidotes to attachment. So first, there's a big danger, in studying Buddhism in general, that when we, and especially like the afflictive emotions in particular, that when we talk about them, we keep it at the level of just kind of abstract intellectual talking. But that's not very helpful, right? So one thing that's very helpful is to first, so like now when we're talking about attachment, first look at one's own experience, in one's own mind, one's own life, different situations one faces, and give rise to a couple clear examples of attachment for yourself. All right, so let's spend a couple minutes doing that. If you remember, well, first of all, maybe just before we go to the definition, just use your own, whatever understanding you have of attachment now. And, give rise to, or remember, think of a couple clear examples of instances, at least one, like 2 or 3 clear examples of attachment for yourself. And then within that, think of, what is the object I'm attached to? Then when that mind of attachment rises in my continuum, and how does it feel? What are the main characteristics of it? Okay, so for a couple of minutes, then just think of at least 1 or more examples of attachment for yourself. So then remember, some of the main characteristics of attachment are that, like any afflictive emotion, when it arises in one's continuum, it disturbs. Its nature is to disturb the peace of the mind. So first check that with the instance of attachment you're thinking of. Does it disturb the peace and contentment of the mind when it arises? And then a second feature of attachment is that it's imbalanced in the way it engages with its object. So the object of attachment, whether it's a person or a reputation or food or whatever, then the mind of attachment, it focuses exclusively on the attractive aspects, or what the perceived, yeah, pleasant, attractive aspects of the object, and then it exaggerates those. Sometimes makes those kind of seem more attractive than they really are, or make it seem as if the object has exclusively, attractive qualities and features, and blinds us to anything ugly or unattractive about the object. And then it also exaggerates in the sense that it makes it seem like that object has the power to satisfy me and give me happiness. So check those in your own experience of attachment. Is that mind of attachment, when it arises, does it exaggerate the attractive aspects of the object? Does it make it seem like the object has the power to satisfy us? And does it kind of make us completely unaware of or blind to anything unattractive about the object of one's attachment? And then another feature of attachment is um, it generates in us the perception that the perceived attractive features of the object that we're attached to, that they they have the attractiveness that we perceive is purely from the side of the object. Means if it's a person or a food or whatever, that the pleasurableness about the object exists completely independent of our own subjective perception, that rather it's from the side of the object that it's attractive. So there's that kind of false appearance, whereas that's false, right? Because if that was the case, then anybody who perceives the same object we're attached to, they should find it similarly attractive, right? But that's not the case. So check that. Is there that kind of false appearance in the face of your attachment, that it seems like all that we're perceiving as good and attractive and nice about the object seems like it's coming exclusively from the side of the object? And then finally, yeah, all these meditations, I'm sorry, we can't spend longer on each step, but because we need to get through other things during this session. But this is a kind of thing you can do to analyze, your own instances of attachment, especially, maybe not now, maybe later in your life when you see some kind of attachment to something arising strongly. And you can use this kind of process to just take the definitions and the kind of defining characteristics, a description of the defining characteristics of attachment, and go through them step by step, relating them to your own experience. And then it helps to get a deeper, kind of more subtle understanding of what's going on in your own psychology. So one last feature though that we'll look at is that when we're attached to something, then our mind it becomes kind of engrossed with it, obsessed with it, and we have a difficult time pulling our attention away. Right, our attention keeps coming back to and kind of longing for that object of attachment. So check that. Is that your own experience? Okay, so relax your attention there. Um, so, so then, yeah, again, there's so many words on the page, kind of, I don't really feel like reading them all. But this is what we went over last week. This is the main definition, at least we'll look at. Move. Okay. Attachment is a mental factor which observes its object, a contaminated phenomena, and exaggerates the attractiveness of the object, then desiring it clings to it. It involves discontentment with what we have and dissatisfaction with ourselves. Then it spreads in the mind. It's difficult to abandon. So that's the last thing kind of we're looking at. It is fundamentally selfish. Yes, actually, these are things I didn't speak about so much. It's fundamentally selfish. That's another thing we can look at when we look at instance of attachment. Is it primarily concerned with me and what I want, or is it concerned with others? So you can always see it's always selfish, concerned with what we want. Except in the case of there's some forms of attachment where we're attached to like achieving the aims of like my family, or my group, or my party. And then it's not exclusively selfish, but it's attachment on behalf of the something. It could be other people that I identify with, and being attached to their something they want. But it clings to its object, so it has difficulty turning one's attention away. That's the last thing we looked at. And then mere liking, joy, and love and desire aren't necessarily attachment. I think we'll come back to that. Look at the antidotes. And then also attachment prevents us from fully enjoying objects because we're craving something more. So we can't be just completely present in the moment, experiencing what already is. Okay, so that's it for some of the defining characteristics of attachment. Then some divisions. Yeah, I mean, we can divide attachment in different ways. One is in terms of objects, so we can be attached to people, and then inanimate things like food or sleep, and then drugs and alcohol, of course. I mean, addiction to drugs and alcohol is a very extreme form of attachment. Then we can be attached to physical sensations, like warmth or coolness or smoothness, and then also and experiences such that we can, include in all the objects of the five senses. So we can be attached to, things that we see, sounds, tastes, or sense, tastes, tactile sensations. Then, I mean, and those are all, especially these like attachment to like inanimate things, like food and objects of the senses. Those tend to be quite, of course, forms of attachment. Yeah, in some cases, I wouldn't say less powerful, because like attachment to drugs and alcohol can be extremely powerful. Um, but you can compare like to the kind of attachment we have to people. It tends to be a little more subtle, because it's not. Of course, it does involve the five senses, but it also involves like the way relating to that person, the way it makes our mind feel, and it relates more to kind of a sense of connection with another person, which is something more subtle, more profound, the kind of pleasure of connection we get with another person, which isn't always bad, of course, but it's something more subtle and powerful than just the pleasure we get from like, food or something we see or hear in general. Although hearing, sounds, um, um, listening to sounds, I mean, especially like music and beautiful sounds, they do have a special power to evoke emotions, I think, in a way that oftentimes sights and like tastes or scents don't so readily. Um, anyway, attachment to people, especially sexual attachment, but a romantic attachment is probably one of the most powerful that we feel. But then we can also have, and these are, I think, a bit more subtle, attachment to one's own views, one's opinions, or attachment to one's reputation. So this can also be extremely powerful, such that even when people feel like their reputation's going to be utterly destroyed, then it can even drive one to suicide. Um, um, yeah, I mean, attachment is extremely powerful. Like you think attachment to people can often, in romantic relationships, can even drive to murder or abuse, just wholly destroying someone's life. Because maybe you're attached to them and they're not, acting in the way you want. They're not don't want to be involved with you. I mean, usually it's men being attached to women. You'll hardly ever hear of a woman killing a male lover. But check it, these kind of attachment to like views, opinions, reputation are more subtle. And then we can be attached to being treated in certain ways, with respect or something. But that's also, I mean, that's how it comes up, because wanting to be treated with respect is not always attachment, right? It's not always a wrong thing. So how do we distinguish is when it's exclusively selfish and it's something that like we're craving for, longing for, in a way that disturbs our own mind. Anyway, if we can discuss more about that if you like. And then I mean, the most fundamental kind of attachment is to our own life and to our identity. So this we see especially when we consider, that we might be dying or at the time of death. We can imagine being separated from this life, and then we cling on to it. We don't want to let it go, because we strongly identify with it, and we see only positive things about it. It's hard to see, even in a very kind of reflective, objective kind of reflective moment. We might, well, that's why it's helpful to see the whole process of dying as just a natural kind of transition process. Thinking about it in that way helps let go of this clinging to just this life, right? Um, and then there's the attachment of the eight worldly concerns, and then here I listed those. This is from Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. Being concerned, so the eight worldly concerns, being wanting to acquire things, and then being attached to not losing things or not acquiring things, being attached to pleasure and being attached to not having pain, right? Being attached to renown or fame, and being attached to not having disrepute or bad reputation, then being attached to praise from others, and being attached to not being criticized. So yeah, these eight worldly dharmas are not objects of my mind. They are all the same to me. So Nagarjuna said in Letter of Friends. So to practice the dharma, our dharma practice should not be motivated by attachment. So shouldn't be motivated by any of those eight worldly concerns or other forms of selfish attachment to pleasures of this life. So that's it about so those are different divisions of attachment. As we were meditating, I was thinking, you can also, instead of dividing attachment in terms of the object of our attachment, you can also, divide up looking at different, our experience of attachment, different types of attachment in terms of like those that are more simple and easy to understand. Generally, when we're meditating on any afflictive emotion, and like we were doing in the meditation just prior, where we're trying to look at examples of attachment in our own experience, we can see that there's some that are very obvious and easy to identify, like with attachment, it might be attachment to a food. I know one like in our one I'm attached to is like salty. Like in India, we eat a lot of dal, which I really like dal, but I like it a little salty. In our house, in the house I live with, there's a few monks who are really well. They've read a lot about the detrimental effects of salt, and so they really don't want salt. So we made an agreement: we don't put salt in any of the food when we cook, and then we can just add our own if we want. But I know I'm kind of attached to like having, especially in my dal, having a little salt. So of course it's just a small, simple thing, but when we're looking at examples of like attachment, anger, ignorance, it's helpful just to start with just small, simple instances of that, whatever afflictive emotion is we're looking at, just because they're kind of easy to look at, easy to understand, and also with something kind of innocuous. I mean, not innocuous like attachment to food. Well, I mean, it depends how you relate to food, but it's easy to start with a sort of afflictive emotion that's not too strong, right? Because if we start with like the most intense form of, or most kind of intrusive form of attachment, in this case, that we have, then when we bring it to mind, it easily just causes a lot of confusion in our mind and makes it difficult to look at it objectively. So when we're looking at any afflictive emotion and trying to understand more about it, it's important to first start looking at, kind of under the microscope of our observation, start looking at an example that's not too difficult to handle when it arises in our mind, so that there's still a lot of space to use wisdom and objectivity to look at it just very carefully. And then when we get some basic understanding of a sort of simple instance of attachment in this case, then we can look at a more subtle kind of attachment, to maybe like attachment to a person in our life. That might be more powerful when it arises also. And then look at an even more subtle form of attachment, which might be like to one's own reputation, or to one's name, or to one's identity as a person. So it's important to kind of use that, look at more simple, first look at more simple instances, and then look at more subtle, complex instances of any afflictive emotion. First look at those that are kind of more weak, and then look at those that are more powerful. Okay, so we're almost to the halfway mark already. So I need to keep moving. So next, causes of attachment. One is just karma and habituation from past lives. From following attachment in past lives, we have a habit, so we can see it automatically arises in the mind. We can contrast that with like, universal loving kindness. That doesn't just automatically arise in the mind so much, maybe in some moments, but we have to work to give rise to it. Or kind of real, pure, selfless love for another person. Or sort of content just with what we have. I mean, different people vary, right, according to their past life habituation and karma. But yeah, generally, those virtuous minds don't arise as easily as the unvirtuous ones. Then another cause of attachment is unrestrained senses. So especially with regard to objects of attachment or attachment to objects of our senses, things that we see, hear, smell, taste. So by not guarding our senses, by not being mindful of where we're directing our attention, then, you could imagine like walking through a shopping mall or a market or something. Then you compare like how if you let sort of the mind of attachment just have free reign, then we're always looking, looking around at every shop window and, oh, that looks so nice, that looks so nice. And just giving rise to more and more kind of longing for different things. Whereas we can also just, kind of be disinterested with those other things, realize, none of those things, no matter what I buy, it's not going to give me ultimate satisfaction. And just, be mindful of what's immediately in front of us now, and what's immediately around us, and not take interest in all those things being displayed. And then the mind stays much more kind of calm, clear, centered, and at ease. So having unrestrained senses is another cause for attachment. Then a fundamental cause is ignorance grasping at a self. So having this exaggerated sense of a self, and then that gives rise to the selfish concern. And then that, which is the next one I have listed here. And then that gives rise to these incorrectly thinking concepts or incorrectly engaging concepts, whereby, once we have a sort of selfish concern, then we divide up, the world into self and other than me, things other than me. And then things that are other, we divide up into those that appear as attractive to us, those that maybe appear neutral, we don't care about, and then those appear as unattractive and we want to be away from, we don't want to be involved with. So then the things that appear as attractive to us, then we have this incorrectly thinking concept that those attractive things, they're attractive from their own side, that they're truly attractive, and that they're only attractive, right? So this is the kind of distortion. So we looked at or meditating on attachment, how the mind, but this is a preliminary to attachment, is where we perceive things as attractive and perceive that attractiveness as being from the side of the object. It's not just an appearance generated by my own karma and habituation or my own opinions, but rather it's from the side of the object. And so it's this kind of link between ignorance and attachment is this one, incorrectly perceiving concepts. So then, because we perceive the object as being attractive from its own side, and thereby having the ability to give pleasure and give us happiness from the side of the object, then we crave for the object, right? So this is the one that if we identify this one especially, recognizing how our perception of attractiveness is just that, it's just our perception, then this can really be a sort of a link in the process giving rise to attachment, where we can cut this link by analyzing to see, does that object really exist as attractive in the way I perceive it or not? Does it really have the ability to give me satisfaction or not? Whether it be another person, a status, food, reputation. Does the object, is my perception of it accurate or not? The way my mind is perceiving and engaging with the object, is that distorted? Is that true? Or is it kind of a false, deceptive appearance and belief that I have about the object? So then if there's space in the mind to use that sort of rational approach, then it can really be like, throwing water on a fire, really cool the fire of attachment quickly. I should say throwing water on like a wood fire, because if you throw water on a grease fire, it just explodes, right? It's not what we want. And then there's the 6 common causes of afflictive emotions that we went through last week. So yeah, I'd like to spend more time on each of these things, but we just don't have it. So, and the most important thing for us is actually the antidotes. So I'll just to look at some of the faults. I mean, faults of attachment are quite obvious, really. It makes you kind of crave things, feel needy, feel empty of being a source of inner satisfaction yourself. So it gives kind of a low self-opinion, a low sense of our own self-worth. It doesn't leave room for contentment, just being simple, just kind of simple contentment with what we already have, because attachment makes us crave something more. It deceives us into believing that happiness comes from outside, something else, doesn't come from inside. It drives us in a never-ending search, therefore, for satisfaction from things outside. And really, from attachment drives us in a never-ending search to get happiness from things that ultimately don't have the ability to give us happiness. Especially if we think about death, then no matter, how much other people or possessions or reputation, how much satisfaction those can give to us in this life, ultimately we die and we're separated from all of them. And then what do? So ultimately we have to find, a source of well-being and satisfaction within ourselves. And that does exist within ourselves. And that's the Buddha's whole message. Each of us have a Buddha nature, right? Each of us have the potential to be fully enlightened and to bring infinite benefit to the lives of others within our own lives. No, there's that potential is there if we only develop it. Like just think about, loving kindness. So we can get so much joy from just generating love, wishing for the well-being of ourselves, wishing for the well-being of other sentient beings, and compassion, recognizing the suffering of others and having a genuine, in our heart, genuinely wishing for beings to be free from suffering. And that, the joy we get from those minds of loving kindness, compassion, caring about others, doesn't depend upon anything anybody else says or does, doesn't depend upon having any possessions. It just comes from our own mind. And then attachment sets us up for disappointment and prepares the ground for anger. The more we're attached to something, the more we've sort of set the stage for us to become upset, disappointed, and angry when we don't get what we want. And then there's more faults here. Yeah, this again, you can just look at in the outlines I'll send out. Sorry, we don't have time to go through, but it's more important we just look at antidotes. Actually, why don't we take a break first? Because we're right at our halfway mark now. So let's take a 5-minute break. And then we'll come back, look at some antidotes, and then we'll practice meditating a little bit on some of. And that's one big difference, you see with animals. Of course, they have attachment too, but they have no space in the mind to think about it objectively. No, they can't really take their own attachment and sort of take it as an object of their thought and think about what's going on, how does it work, how can I reduce. That's one big difference between humans and animals. Like animals, that's why they're really like, creatures of instinct. They're really acting according to their habituation from past lives and the karma and the way it's ripening. And there's no space to apply like this kind of rational wisdom to change the way they are. They're just really locked into being how they are. I think in one sense, that's why often as humans we kind of envy the sort of ease that animals have with life. But I think that does kind of bring an ease to life where you just act according to your instinct, according to, in a way, it's like the way you're supposed to act. You just act automatically in that life. It does bring a kind of relaxation on the one hand. Humans have the potential for so much more suffering because we have this intellectual capability. If we use it in a wrong way, it can create much more suffering than animals can possibly have. But if we use it in a good way, it can bring so much more control into our own lives and a much more deliberate decision about how we want to use our lives. And we can do so much more with our lives than animals. To benefit others, we can do much more than animals could possibly do. So it's kind of a double-edged sword that we have, intellectual ability. Okay, so let's look at just some of the the antidotes to attachment, and then practice a bit with them. Yeah, and then move on to anger. So first is clearly identifying the nature of attachment and just becoming more aware of it. So that's like what we were doing, before, when we were just looking at an instance of attachment in our own experience and checking through its characteristics. How does it arise in the mind? What's the object of my attachment? How do I relate to that object? Is it distorted or truthful? How we cling to the object and exaggerate the ability of the object of attachment to satisfy us. So just objectively looking at all the nature and characteristics of attachment in that way, it already has a sobering effect on the mind. It starts to create some distance between our sense of self as a person and the way we relate to that object, and thereby give us more control over how we want to relate to that object. So one big antidote is just looking at, attachment objectively and rationally. So again, like I was saying before, we begin with obvious examples, then look at more subtle instances, and then look at the desire, like when we're annoyed or have aversion or anger, look at the kind of desire, because we always become annoyed or angry because we want something. If we didn't want anything at all, then no matter what happened, it wouldn't bother us. It's because we want something to be in a certain way and it doesn't happen in the way we want. People don't treat us in the way we want. Things don't happen in the way we want. Then we get annoyed or angry. So that's not so much. It's more just looking at how that one's more looking at how attachment is involved with anger. But just recognizing that, when we get angry and annoyed, that arises from a kind of attachment. Just recognizing that can cause us to see the dangers of attachment and thereby act as an antidote, be more aware of when we're becoming attached to something. Then how that sets us up for disappointment and anger, like I was saying before. Then also seeing how much attractiveness, seeing how much attractiveness we project onto the object. So again, this is easy to see with like a simple example like food. How we deceive ourselves thinking, oh, if I only have this food, I'll be, really happy. And how that's just a projection of our mind. It's not even, it's totally not true. So then we have to use different reasonings to see why that's true. Like one reasoning is to see that, when we're really unhappy, no matter what we eat, it's not going to help. So if a food really had the ability to satisfy and make us feel good, then whenever we eat it, it should have that effect, but it doesn't. Also, if a food really had the ability to satisfy, make us feel good from the side of the object, then whoever enjoys that food should similarly enjoy it, but they don't. And then again, if the food, its nature was to satisfy us, then the more we experience of that food, the more we eat it or drink it or whatever, the more and more happy we should feel. But it's not the case. The pleasure we get from the food is just the suffering of change we discussed earlier. Then another fault is reflecting on the faults. So all the faults that we looked at before, all the faults of attachment, just reflecting on those again and again, how it leads us into disappointment, how it gives rise to anger, how it causes, it's like chasing a rainbow, it causes us to totally unrealistically look for satisfaction and well-being in a place that from something that cannot give that to us. And then think about impermanence and death. Ultimately, we'll be separated from all the objects of attachment. So they're definitely not an ultimate source of satisfaction. And how attachment causes us to have a sense that within ourselves, we don't have an inner source of well-being and happiness, irrespective of anything outside of us. So thinking about all the different faults of attachment and again helps cool that fire of attachment and give it up. Then recognizing like the greater joy of enjoying pleasures in the moment without the expectation of future outcomes. So this especially applies, to other people. If we're attached to another person, then we tend to, create all kinds of fantasies and projections about them and relate more to our own projection about the person than to the actual person themselves. So we don't, genuinely connect with a person. Also, like fantasizing about objects of attachment, it takes us totally out of reality so that we can't just enjoy the present moment. So it cuts us off from the ability to enjoy just the simple pleasures like in the moment. And then another kind of general antidote to attachment is practicing having few desires and contentment. So just generally trying to simplify our life, try to reduce the amount of possessions that we have, reduce the amount of kind of sense of need we have for this, or this, or this, this. Just practice contentment with simple things, with what we have, and practice gratitude. Practice generating gratitude and appreciation for what we have. That helps reduce kind of wanting more. Yeah, generally, in Tibetan, when we talk about the two main antidotes to attachment are we'll call dojung and chokshe. In Tibetan, dojung means having few desires, just not desiring a lot of things, being content with less. And chokshe just means contentment, right? Just being, so few desires means not wanting more and more and more. Then being content means just feeling like what we have is enough, right? They're slightly different. But those are considered the two main antidotes to attachment. Having few desires and practicing contentment. Contentment is kind of appreciation of what we have already. And then another big antidote for attachment is meditation on impermanence and death, as I've already mentioned a bit. So thinking about impermanence is more like, oh, I wish time would slow down. I'm attached to time going more slowly, or us having more time. Anyway, yeah, impermanence and death, I've already mentioned a bit, so I won't say more. And then practicing, so because attachment arises from selfishness, then practicing cherishing others more than self. So practicing being more concerned about using our life to accomplish the welfare of others, that also kind of cools the sense of craving, grasping for what I want. And then meditation on the interdependent nature and the emptiness of all phenomena. Maybe I'll come back to that when we speak about ignorance. Okay, so those are some of the main antidotes to attachment. So why don't we just take a few minutes and try practicing some of those, or at least one antidote. So just sit quietly and focus your attention inwards and regenerate this, remembering this instance of attachment you looked at before, or another one. Let's try to give rise to see clearly by experientially seeing an instance of attachment in your own mind, in your own experience. So first of all, just as we were doing before, we were looking at the characteristics of that attachment, kind of comparing it to the definition and description that I explained before. So first of all, just can you see how that functions as an antidote? Just looking at the nature of attachment itself. And then a second antidote is just to ask the question, can this object of my attachment, even if I could have exactly what I want, enjoy it exactly as I like, could it ever really give me ultimate satisfaction? Could it fully satisfy me in the way I, ultimately want or not? And then a third antidote is think about impermanence and death. Think about how no matter that, myself, I'm changing moment by moment. The object of attachment is changing moment by moment. So inevitably we'll be separated. And the pleasure I enjoy from it won't last. It's impermanent. And then ultimately, I'll die and be separated from the object of attachment, or if it's a person, they'll die. So it cannot give me lasting satisfaction. So think about impermanence and death for a minute. See how to use that as an antidote to attachment. And then finally, just try for a moment practicing having few desires and practicing contentment. So just imagine for yourself, especially in relation to the instance or instances of attachment you're thinking of, then how could I think for yourself, how could I practice having less desire and practicing content that I have for oneself? How could that function as an antidote? Would it function as an antidote? Okay, so let's pause there. So if you have any questions about any of that, you can discuss or comments. Did you find those kind of antidotes somewhat effective in that, just in the short time we use? Yeah. Okay, good. So yeah, so the idea is that, that's just kind of a little taste, no? But if you can spend more time, on those, on each of the steps. And generally when we do meditations, like in a setting like this, we just spend just a few minutes on each step. But actually any one of those steps, you could meditate on that for a whole, half hour, spend a whole session and kind of go into it more deeply and see where it kind of takes you. But that's one of the reasons I also like to give outlines, is so that then you have some kind of notes that you can go back to. And then also that's why it's so important to study and read other material related to, like in this case, attachment. And then these days, often in Buddhist publications, especially by an FPMT or by His Holiness Dalai Lama, then they'll have like bullet points at the end of the chapter, points for meditation. So you can spend more time on each of the steps of the, like in this case, the antidotes to attachment. And then the more you meditate on those antidotes, the more it becomes like second nature. Now, the first time thinking about them, it might kind of feel foreign, and we might feel unsure if we're thinking about it the right way, or have a lot of questions, doubts about it. But the more we meditate on the antidotes, like again and again, we become more comfortable with them. We become more habituated to them. They arise more automatically. And then in like day-to-day life, when we see we're becoming attached to something, we can catch ourselves more quickly and change the way we think about the situation, and thereby prevent attachment from arising, especially in the developmental stages before it becomes like too intense and strong. Yeah, if there's no questions, then we'll move on to the next, the sequel in the trilogy. Be good. Someone made a trilogy of movies like ignorance, then attachment, and then anger. A whole story, just a nice story or two, like depicting each one very clearly. Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he would speak about that the last few years. I attended a retreat, a month-long retreat with Rinpoche in 2019. And at that time, the very first talk Rinpoche gave in that retreat, he was speaking about how it'd be good that someone make like cartoons, use like cartoon animals speaking about the Dharma, the Four Noble Truths and the afflictive emotions and the antidotes. Like make little stories where cartoon figures are in a very simple way are speaking to each other about some of the main themes of Dharma, so that it's very funny and enjoyable and entertaining. But yet, even children or adults can also just get the essential message. Yeah. Okay. So anger is a bit easier to talk about, actually, just because the faults of anger are more obvious. I think generally the way anger works is a little bit more simplistic. Attachment is very subtle. The way it arises in the mind. It's kind of deceptive. It's very deceptive. Whereas anger is just obviously kind of harmful. Yeah. So there's this common analogy I think I mentioned before, but where trying to get rid of attachment is like trying to wash oil out of cloth. Like it's very difficult. You have to work at it again and again and again. Whereas trying to get rid of anger from our mind is like washing just dirt out of cloth. Just one rinse, often it's gone. Or one washing with soap and the dirt's gone. But the oil you have to wash again and again to separate it from the cloth. But again, anger we'll look at under like 5 headings: definition, and divisions, and causes, faults, and then finally some antidotes. So you can already see the first was a lot less. And the definition of anger, anger observes an object, such as a living being, like a person. It can be self. We can be angry at ourselves. It can be another person. It could be plant, like weeds in your yard or something. Painful, or painful feelings, or it can observe inanimate things. So unpleasant feelings we can get angry at, or inanimate things we can get angry at. Our laptop if it's not working right, or angry at our house for dripping water from the ceiling or something. Or a car for breaking down on the highway. So we can get angry at sentient beings or inanimate things. But anger exclusively focuses on and exaggerates the negative aspects of its object. So it's the opposite of attachment, right? Attachment exclusively focuses on the pleasant, attractive aspects of the object and doesn't see the negative. So anger is the opposite. It focuses on the pleasant aspects of the object and doesn't see the negative aspects of it. Oh, sorry, I think I mixed that up. Anger exclusively focuses on the negative aspects of the object and doesn't see the attractive or positive aspects. All right, so think about, like when you're angry at a person, like in that moment. So because oftentimes, I always think about this when we meditate about, the visualization for doing for generating the four immeasurable thoughts, immeasurable love, compassion. So we visualize ourselves surrounded by all sentient beings. So first we visualize like friends, our mother and father, friends and family to our sides and behind us because they support us. And then we visualize those who we tend to become angry at directly in front, facing towards us. But oftentimes it's the same people, right? We get angry at it's our friends and family often because oftentimes it's because we have the most expectation of them. So then when they don't meet our expectations, then we get irritated, annoyed at them. But it's okay. In that case, it's okay to visualize the same person in both places, no? Like someone you're very close to, visualize them, because generally they're very kind and supportive and helpful. But then sometimes they do this thing that really like irritates me. And in that context, you can visualize them also in front. Right? Recognizing that we have to put special effort into practicing patience towards them. That's the point for visualizing them in front. So, and you can see, related to what we're saying here, how anger focuses on the negative aspects of the object. So you can see how, like with a person whom we get angry with, maybe someone we love, we care about. In general, we see so many good things about them, and we really appreciate them, and we like them. We see them in an attractive light. But in the very moment we're angry at them, our perception of them totally changes. In that moment, that mind of anger, it doesn't see anything good, right? It focuses on something, the person did that we don't like, or something they're doing that we disapprove of, or something they said that irritated us. The mind it's like hones in, it just focuses on that, and it totally blinds us. We become blinded to the big picture, blinded to all the things that we all the reasons we care about that person and don't want to hurt them. In that moment, we just focus on this negative thing that we perceive about them, and then leads us into wanting to harm the person because of that, and justifies because of that. So the mind of anger focuses on a living sentient being or inanimate thing, exclusively focuses and exaggerates the negative aspects of the object, and then gives rise to a harsh, tormented state of mind. So this is more talking about how it affects our continuum. It makes our mind kind of coarse and harsh and rough and very disturbed, very agitated, disturbed. Like it really disturbs us. Oftentimes we get angry because we feel hurt. We feel hurt by another person, or we feel hurt by something. We feel like it's too much. We become overwhelmed with feeling like something's happening or someone's doing something that's just too much for us to bear. Right? That's why patience is one of the main antidotes for anger, like increasing our level of tolerance, increasing the strength of our perseverance so that we can bear more and more without feeling overwhelmed. But in a moment when we get angry, we feel like, something's just too much. And it's like, it shakes the mind. It's like, so the mind feels harsh, pain, hurt. And then, so we're focusing on the negative aspects of the object. Then we feel very disturbed, hurt, agitated. And then we give rise to the wish to harm others. So this is, a real hallmark characteristic of anger is it contemplates harming the object. So it's kind of like, well, if you ask, like, what's the difference between being irritated and being angry? Is like, yeah, irritated, maybe you don't really have it's like a precursor to anger. Like real anger, in the way we're defining it, discussing it in the context of Buddhist philosophy, is is it gives rise to the mind to harm, wishing to harm. Um, so why don't we again just take a moment and look at an instance of our own, an example for ourselves, and then see if it fits this description, this definition, or not. And as you're doing that, they'll also be mindful how just this practice of trying to looking objectively. So here, like when we do this, it's kind of like, we put on our lab coat, our white coat with our uh, pocket pen holder in our pocket or whatever, and our clipboard, and we're kind of, in a way, it's like with a part of our mind to look accurately at our own experience of any afflictive emotion, in this case, anger. We want to remember it in a way that actually we feel it. We feel a degree of what it was like to be in that moment when we're angry. But we also don't want to become totally overcome by that experience, such that there's no space for objectivity. With another part of our mind, we want to have this kind of third person objective perspective, looking at our own experience of anger and trying to see it and understand it more clearly, right? So it's like in a lab, if you're studying a disease, you have to actually have a specimen of the disease in the lab. But yet you don't want to be totally so sick with the disease that you can't look through the microscope and take measurements and do experiments to understand it more deeply. Okay, so just give rise to. So again, when we're looking at anger, be careful not to think about something that makes you so angry that that anger takes over your mind. So start with a sort of small, innocuous instance of anger, kind of small, simple, weak one that you can learn to look at it more easily with. So then what is the object of your anger? And does it focus exclusively on negative aspects of the object in that moment? And is it a disturbing, tormented state of mind? So when the anger arises in your continuum, does it disturb the mind in a quite powerful way? And a related question here is, can you be happy? At the same time, there's anger in the mind. Can your mind also be happy in that moment? Or is it a naturally unhappy state of mind? And then another, does it give rise to a wish to harm the object of your anger? And then a final thing to ask is, does the anger, when it arises in my mind, one's own mind, does it seem like, does it also exaggerate the unattractive aspects of the object of anger, in that it seems like, the unattractiveness, what we find ugly about the object of our anger, or displeasing about it, that it exists purely from the side of the object, and it has the power to destroy my happiness, and that it's not just a matter of my perception, the way I perceive the object. It's from the side of the object itself is truly unattractive, unpleasing, disturbing. So there's that kind of false appearance of that ugly, unattractive nature being exclusively from the side of the object, independent of my perception. Because there's that kind of false appearance there. And maybe one more thing to look at is, oftentimes, we say, like, you make me angry, or this makes me angry, as if the object has the power to make us angry or not. So we kind of deny responsibility. So just like with attachment, we feel like the object has the power to make us happy or not. When actually it's not like that. It's from the side of our mind that we feel pleased or not by that object. So with anger, we feel like it's that the object has the power to make us unhappy or not. So there's that. Can you see that kind of false perception the mind of anger has, where there's this sense that it's the side of the object, again, from its own side, it makes us unhappy, independent of the way we relate to it. So we kind of shirk responsibility for the way we relate to that object. Okay, so relax your attention there. So we only have about 10 minutes left. So we'll look at some of the causes, and let's say, no, first the divisions, the causes, the faults, and then the antidotes in 10 minutes. So divisions of anger, again, by object, basically, into sentient beings. And it's helpful to know, actually, you can look at anger in different ways. So we were looking now at, like, anger as it arises in our own continuum, and then looking at, the characteristics of it. But it's also very helpful, very useful to look at, let's see, those who, what am I saying? Those who have harmed us or harming us, Oh yeah, so we can become angry at those who harmed us or are harming us or will harm us. At those, so angry at we can be angry at those who harm our friends or those who help our enemies. Those are, okay. We can become angry at oneself or angry at inanimate objects. Yeah, those are easy. But this one I think is more, I think it's this one. Let's see. Oh yeah, you did. This one is more helpful. So we can look at anger as it arises, like in our own mind. That's what we were just doing. But then we can also look at anger as it arises in other people's minds, right? That's also a very helpful way because it's easier to be more objective because it's not us, right? So think about anger, like the defects of anger with regard to someone who's getting angry at us. It's so easy to see how it makes them think irrationally, makes them look, appear very ugly, makes them do things that are just completely ridiculous, and how it hurts us, right? So when we think about how other people get angry at us and how, the way they're thinking about, the way they're understanding what they're saying becomes so distorted, and oftentimes irrational, and how hurtful it is to us. Then when we use that same reasoning and think, oh, when I get angry, how I'm under the same, there's the same danger that I just don't see things accurately at all. I totally distort the way that, I understand the situation. I don't see reality. How I look very unattractive, and how I do things that are very hurtful and harmful to other people. It's one of the big faults of anger. So it's very helpful to understand anger, not only by looking at how it arises in our own minds, but thinking about when we've been the object of other people's anger. That's a great way to see the faults, thinking about how it arises when someone is angry at us. And then thinking about it as a third person observer. When we see one person getting angry at another person. So like maybe in our family, there's like one of our siblings was angry at the other, or there's one, or in a time we've been with other friends and one friend gets angry at another friend. How it's disturbing to so many, everyone around, and how to think about how, was the anger working in that person's mind? What are the effects of it? So it's another very good way to look to understand. So there's these three ways: thinking about how anger arises in our own continuum, how it works when someone's angry at us, and then how anger works when it's someone we see being angry at another person. So then causes of anger, I don't know, I wrote, what did I even write here? I don't remember. So many things. Oh yeah, this is important. So the general reason for looking at causes of anger is to see, so that because when we're in the midst of being very angry, we can't do anything about it. We're overpowered by the emotion, and it's too late to really effectively deal with it. At that moment, we should practice Shanti Deva's advice to just remain like a block of wood. Just like when you see you're really angry, just don't say anything, don't do anything. Walk away if you can. Because anything you say or do is bound to be hurtful to someone and bound to cause more animosity between you and someone else. But so that's why it's so important to analyze the causes of anger. So like, how does it first arise? We can see we're not angry all the time. If we're angry all the time, our lives would be very short and miserable, right? So we're not angry all the time. But we can see when anger first arises, how there are certain physical feelings we have. The heart starts to race. We start to clench, certain muscles in our body. You may clench our teeth or make fists. We sort of feel more tension in the body. So to be aware of all those things, which are like, the physical signs can be very helpful because we can recognize, oh yeah, those. I'm starting to get angry. Then we already start to apply antidotes when the anger is very small and it's infinitesimal stages. Then it's easy to change. It's easy to, we don't want to say suppress. We want to think about the object, relate to the object differently so that we don't become angry. So it's important to learn to understand each instance of anger before it first begins, so that in the future we can recognize it in its infantile stages and redirect our attention in more constructive ways. And then, so there's the general causes of afflictive emotions we discussed earlier in this last session. And then there's some specific causes of anger. So by being more aware of these, we know when we are more likely to get angry. So there's certain people we get angry at, or certain situations we get angry at. So recognizing those uncommon causes, the things that trigger us, then we can prepare ourselves for those, and put special effort into practicing patience and tolerance in those situations. Like if we know, like I know myself when I'm tired, when I'm like, I feel overworked, so I'm just like have way more things that I feel like I need to do than I can possibly do in a short time. And then someone comes and asks me about some other thing that they need help with, that I think, you don't really need my help with that, then that's something I get irritated at now. Or most of us, when we're tired, we're more prone to become angry. When we're hungry and feel weak or feel vulnerable for some other reason, we're more prone to become angry. So thinking about those different kind of causes, situations that become causes for us to potentially become angry, or specific people that irritate us, or specific type of people or type of behavior that we find kind of provokes us. The more we're aware of those, then the more we can remember to especially be mindful, to practice patience in those situations, and practice more put more energy into practicing self-control in those situations, and which means try to apply the antidotes to anger more strongly. Think in more positive ways in those situations too, trying not to get angry. Then, the more we're self-centered, egotistic, and selfish, the more angry we become. So practice, caring more about, being more concerned about others than ourselves, is an antidote. Then the more strongly we're attached to things, the more we have fixed ideas about things need to be this way, other people need to act this way, things need to happen this way. The more rigidly we have that, then the more we're prone to be upset. But when things don't happen the way we want, right? So it's like the more we're attached, it's like we're setting up a big target where the arrow can just strike and make us angry. So just kind of try to reduce that sort of these strong expectations. Then, like I said, being tired, hungry, being busy and stressed. Gosh, there's so many more listed here. Being worried or afraid of something, feeling superior to others, and then, feeling superior to someone else, then we're more prone to be insulted by them. The more we dwell on faults that we see in ourselves or faults we see in others, then the more likely we are to get angry. Then feeling defensive, insecure, sets us up to be angry. And then just generally when we're unhappy, we're more prone to become angry. All right. So recognizing all those. Then all the faults, in the moment, anger makes us unhappy. It causes those around us to be unhappy and to not feel safe. If we get angry again and again, other people, they don't like to be around us. They try to avoid us. They don't feel safe when we're at this. And we ourselves don't have good control of our own mind. We easily just kind of lose it. We easily have this overly strong reaction to things that, other people can kind of bear with tolerance. When we're a group of people, we become angry with someone else, everybody feels uncomfortable. And we ourselves can't enjoy things we ordinarily enjoy. In one moment of our trust is destroyed. So if we're, friends, we built up, it takes a long time to build up trust and to build up sense of closeness and understanding with others. Then one moment of anger can destroy, years of friendship we develop. Most criminals, I've worked with criminals in a prison in Bangalore. Most of them will say, the crime for which they ended up in prison is in one moment of anger. They did something stupid that they wouldn't have done ordinarily, and then that shapes the rest of their life. For the rest of their life, they spend years in prison, and the rest of their life are known as like an ex-convict, or So it can really, we can lose our job. One moment of being angry cause us to lose our job, cause us to irrevocably destroy like a relationship, like a child or spouse, a sibling. So typical in families, when the parents pass away, then the siblings argue over the inheritance, get angry at each other, and they never want to speak to each other again. We create enemies, so it creates enemies of others. In the moment we're unattractive, in the moment we're angry, we're unattractive, we sound petty, and we do things that are foolish. Leads to creating non-virtuous actions, slander, harsh speech. Our judgment gets totally skewed. We don't think of the long-term consequences of what we're saying or doing. Increases our pride and arrogance, our sense of being superior to others. And then, I mean, the main faults, there's so many faults, but I mean, there's also, it is detrimental to our health. We can't sleep. We get high blood pressure. I mean, there's studies that show, just objective, empirical, scientific studies. The more people get angry, it shortens their lifespan. One of the things that's one of the best predictors of having a long, healthy life is the amount of healthy social connections we have with other people, friends and family. So the more we get angry, the more we destroy those connections. And then the more we're lonely. We end up just being alone. And then it's very bad for our health, shortens our lifespans. But in typical Buddhist text, though, one of the biggest, probably the first and major fault of anger listed is that it destroys the merit we've accumulated over eons even. So by practicing generosity, practicing kindness, selflessly helping others, we accumulate merit, right? By having faith, making prayers, making offerings. But anger is such a powerful, negative, destructive emotion. It destroys these roots of merit that we've accumulated over a long time. And also it's by the force of anger that we're thrown into we create the karma to be thrown into the worst rebirths in the future, into rebirth as a hell or hungry ghost or an animal, or even, also, I mean, one of the effects of, when we get angry and we just kind of follow it, is that we create the cause to again get angry in the future. And also we create the cause for other people to get angry at us. I mean, that's one big thing to help us practice patience when other people getting angry at us, is to recognize, oh, this is a result of my own anger in past lives. By becoming angry at other people and acting out of that, I created the karma to be the object of other people's anger. Just like, when we kill the sentient being, we create the cause to be physically harmed by other sentient beings in the future. It's the same. So thinking about those karmic effects of anger is also antidote. Okay, we're already way over time. So the antidotes, I already mentioned so many, right? And anyway, I'll send out all these notes so you can look. So I'm sorry we don't have more time on anger, but I don't want to take up a lot more of your time. But you can see, just from looking at how we use the antidotes to meditate on attachment, you can easily see, just take what Pabongkar Rinpoche describes, what's described. There's an article by Lama Zopa Rinpoche on anger in the required readings for this module. And then from the outlines I gave here, you could take all those different ways of thinking about anger, and then, so again, give rise to an instance of it in your own experience, and then try applying those different antidotes. Yeah, and have to do again and again. Meditation is something we have to do again and again, and then gradually we build up the strength of the antidote such that it's like it's kind of a weapon or a tool in our kit, so that then we see anger start to rise, we can immediately go to that antidote and use it to keep the anger at bay, or when we have already become angry, to just recover from it more quickly. Right? Okay, so thank you all for joining this session, and let's rejoice in whatever merits we've created from the beginning of the session till now. And then rejoice in the Shakyamuni, the virtue, or the merit created by Shakyamuni Buddha and all these holy beings who have passed down this kind of spiritual teachings, these very wise, helpful teachings to us from generation to generation, from thousands of years ago. And then our own teachers of this life, we can rejoice. And then rejoice of all the merit created by ordinary beings like ourselves all over the world, doing very good things. So all this merit gathered together, then we dedicate, especially that we ourselves and all sentient beings be free from attachment and anger. We can think of anger as the cause of so many problems in the world. Even one of the faults I didn't mention, think of any war, any, domestic violence, any abuse. So many problems in the world arise motivated by anger in individuals' minds. So may all beings be free from anger and the effects of anger. Also attachment and the effects of attachment. And in short, be free from every form of suffering, the mental, physical. And may all beings, ourselves and others, have every form of well-being and happiness, from patience and loving kindness, which is the opposite of anger, contentment, and having few desires, which is the opposite of attachment. Then having wisdom, the opposite of ignorance, and all the other realizations on the path to full enlightenment. Then for this purpose, may the Buddha Dharma flourish, especially this center, Tipton Noble Link at Santa Fe, and have all conducive conditions to be able to offer programs like this for ourselves and others. And then may the life of His Holiness Dalai Lama and all of our other teachers be long. May the unmistaken reincarnation of Lama Zopa Rinpoche quickly return. And especially may all of us students and centers, all the students of Lama Zopa Rinpoche of FPMT who make programs like this possible. May they work harmoniously together to continue to fulfill the wishes and intentions and all the enlightened activities of Lama Zopa Rinpoche now and far into the future. And then bring any prayers you yourself would like to make for yourself or for family, friends, or any intentions, special intentions you'd like to dedicate towards. Bring those to mind now. So may those your personal prayers also be accomplished. Okay, thank you all, and see you next week.